it's like I said before, it's really kind of good to me. I thought, do you know what? It'd be nice to get someone on the channel that's from the other side rather than the fighting side, the media side. And obviously, you agreed, which was great. But just a bit of background about yourself. It'd be really interesting to kind of see your story, how you kind of got into the media side. I mean, was it always something you wanted to do when you were a kid?
It's actually something that I've been exploring quite a bit in lockdown, because there's just certain things that I want to improve about my professional approach, but also my personal life, because the job has taken me far and wide. I've been doing a whole lot of travel. I must have been away a third of the year last year. So that has its own strains when you have a family. So it's made me retrace my steps a bit. And I do remember creating little shows with a guy called Ben, who used to live near my nan. I used to stay with my nan quite regularly on the weekends, and he and I would record stuff together. So it definitely does trace back. But it was only really until I was in the city. So I'd graduated. I was working in recruitment at the time, in quite a consultative recruitment capacity, though not like a real wide boy setup. And because I didn't go away at university and discover myself, I was in love at the time, so I stayed at home with my girlfriend and at my mum and dad's house. So I never really spread my wings. But when I started working in the city, I moved in with a couple of mates. We were living in North London at the time of our life, and I was getting paid. So it's kind of interesting, and this confidence grew in me. And I would watch TV, and at the time, you may or may not remember a show called like T4.
Yeah, also
Vernon Kay, for example. And they weren't great at the time. It was very early on in their career. And I might have been a bit critical back then, but now having trodden the boards myself, they were probably way better than I was when I first started out. But I genuinely thought I could do a job like they could. Be light-hearted and interesting and things like that. And I also thought there was quite a nice prestige to TV presenting. And I've tried to explain this to American colleagues as well. I'm actually really, I guess, a commentator. And in the UK, they were more or less faceless. We didn't really see commentators. But the presenter, you did. And they typically got a lot of the plaudits. And it just seemed really fun. So I actually threw the towel in on my job in the city and joined for free the Kilroy show for a bit of work experience. And I remember it was good fun, but I was only really trying to get into TV in order to be in front of the camera. And I spent some time at the Kilroy show. They offered me a job. I knocked them back because they were in Elstree. I wanted to be in the heart of things, which was White City, down there at Television Centre as well, BBC Television Centre. So I ended up at Watchdog. And it was an interesting role where I essentially used to manage a lot of the work experience and work with all the little production teams. We'd come up with stories, but I'd also be part of the stings as well. It was exciting, but I'd gone from a really strong salary in the city to earning, I think, 14 grand a year. And as much as you got to start somewhere, it did have an overall effect, because I ended up running out of money moving back home with my mum and dad. I was getting deeper and deeper into production stuff rather than presenting stuff. I did a few screen tests here and there, and people would be putting me forward for various things, even down to the economics unit in news, whether I would be a presenter for those guys. Very bizarre. But at the time, that was an area that I wanted to go in, and it never really went anywhere. So I ended up leaving the BBC, just a culmination of different reasons. I went back to the city, the IT bubble had burst, that was a bit rubbish. And then I joined my dad's family business and retrained as an electrician for like 10, 15 years. I was with him. So it's been a very interesting path for me, maybe not for people listening to this. But the big thing was I've always been involved in sports, a variety of different sports, but combat sports was always a theme. And it came back with mixed martial arts. And I think because the community was so small, so tight, the sport was so young, it needed a lot of help in a lot of different places. The talent pool wasn't very deep. And when opportunities presented themselves for me to do some work, be it reporting, writing, on camera, off camera commentary. Like I seized it. It reminded me of what I wanted to be when I was younger, but had maybe failed, if you like. And it was commentary that really, it just ticked all the boxes. And because mixed martial arts really has grown from an American style, it integrated presenting as well. So now the commentator would open the show, and now I'm getting to try out a little bit of presenting as well as the commentary. And here we are. So, and it's, you know, as we said before we went live, it's been over 10 years now, and it's been a really steep learning curve, lots of experiences along the way. And my career through life has meandered. I'm grateful for it. But yeah, still a long way to go, I hope.
It is that's quite an incredible kind of journey from where you come. I mean, you mentioned White City. I worked there for a while, and it was and obviously working in TV, the days, as you said, the salary's not, when you're starting off, is not great, and the days are ridiculously long. You're probably doing like 14, 16-hour days if you're doing live shows and stuff. But yeah, even though the salary maybe not quite as, you know, what you were earning before, it puts you in good stead, isn't it, for what you're doing now? Because obviously the days are going to be long, and you know, then you know, you're doing a lot of kind of research and what have you. It's so that there is some kind of positives from that, haven't you?
There's absolutely been a lesson in every single decision that I've made, and even though I would probably tell people, particularly younger people, maybe not people that are of my age group, because it just becomes complicated with grown-up stuff and bills, but if there is one thing that you're truly passionate about, then you should be aiming to keep that one thing in mind. And you might kind of go like this, either side of the graph, either side of that pathway, but essentially you find your way to it. Now, I am not going to sit here and say I consciously had that one thing in mind and it was my North Star that I was always being guided by. But one thing I will say is, when I worked in the city, I got a lot of interview training, which has been a basis for absolutely everything I do. I wouldn't call I'm not a journalist, but from a journalistic point of view, the interview forms a lot of your investigative work. So that was very good. It put me in front of a wide range of people, all the way up to boardroom level, and I don't really get intimidated as a result. I've always been quite young looking. When I was younger, I used to look really young looking. So like early 20s, you'd think I was a teenager. So I used to have to talk a lot to get credibility for people to take me seriously. So I learned some lessons there. I also learned how to dress pretty smart, and I was around some pretty cool people who had silver tongues, if you like. I saw the benefit of that. So that was a great lesson. Then when I went to TV, I was at what is it, consumer products and things like that, which is quite boring, but there was some investigative work there. I peeled back the curtain to TV work and saw how hard you had to grind at things, and it wasn't all glamour, but it did teach me the basics. Even though I wasn't really looking for those, I wanted to be in front of the camera. But then I think one of the biggest lessons was actually joining up with my dad's business, because I was an electrician, and it is a tough way to earn a living. You don't get respect for it. People don't particularly like you for it. The money isn't always there. There's no award show. There's no plaudits. There's not a lot of glamour to it. But yet there was something about being involved in the family business and working really damn hard. And now when I have moments where, in relative terms, it's a bad day, the environment might not be as good as it could be, I remember the times where I was crawling around in a loft in July with insulation, which makes your skin itch upon contact. You're sweating buckets, you're filling your lungs with crap, and that's just what you got to do. You got to get that job done. You got to move on. And life now, when I have those moments, I'm like, life could be a lot worse, John, and it has been. And I'm not saying that was terrible, but for me, in relative terms, from the experiences that I can draw on, I can look back on a lot of these things, and it gives me my compass can be calibrated back to where it needs to be, so I can just be a realist and get back to work.
Just going back, so I had when I told my dad comes from that sort of kind of background. So when I told my dad, or said to my dad, I'm going to be studying like media and what have you, and went into TV, it was like it was the worst thing ever. Did you have the same kind of experience with, like, say, your dad, because he comes from like an electrician kind of background? You like, no, I want to do TV or want to do like the media side. Did he have his reservations?
Yeah, it's an interesting question, actually. So without kind of, the family dynamic's quite interesting. My mum is half Arabic, half Irish. Her mum was from a very, very well-heeled family, but because she ran away with an Irishman when she was very young, she was just ostracized from everything and cut off.
Yeah.
And they ended up, long story short, living in a council flat with very little. And then my grandma and granddad, they split up. I lost my granddad. I was like 18 months old, so I never really knew him. But my mum's upbringing was very tough. My dad had a wonderful upbringing, but working class. My great granddad was the Pearly King of Mill Hill, so quite a Cockney influence. My granddad was a chimney sweep and a postman, used to run 2 jobs. So everyone's been really hands-on, but none of those guys moan. None of them moan. They're all very proud, and my dad's done a great job in providing for us. And he lives I live in the town that I grew up in. It's a place called Radlett, which is in sort of Hertfordshire. It's a lovely area, and not many tradesmen probably get to live in Radlett. So, but my mum has always been quite Middle Eastern in, you must be a dentist, doctor, lawyer, politician. You must go to university. And I was actually the first from my family to go to university. And it was like a really big thing, which I don't really care for. So she wasn't really happy about me joining my dad's business. My dad was happy for the help, but he did actually say to me, to answer your question about when I left the city, when I was earning good money, he said, you're making a big mistake here. Because I was staring at a strong salary back then, and he was like, "You're taking this for granted. There's it's this, that, and the other." But I was of the mindset at the time, there's more to life than just money, and it doesn't always make you happy. And I still agree with that. But money does make things a lot easier. And so, yeah, I don't think he followed that career all the time. But then this next revisit to broadcasting in front of the camera, if it wasn't for my dad's flexibility, and if it wasn't for him probably being more of a father than a boss, I wouldn't have been able to do the work that I've done. I was running a business with him, but every weekend I'd go off to a fight show. Every lunchtime I'd disappear into the van to call someone, or I'd be listening to podcasts while everyone else would be trying to listen to the radio. And it took a lot of patience for him. So if it hadn't have been for him, then he could have quashed and extinguished any hopes that I had of making this broadcasting thing a thing.
Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? The different generations of how they perceive kind of certain, like how they want you to kind of grow up. Basically, my dad, I was the oldest, and my dad wanted me to do a trade because he done. He's one of these old school fathers. He was a mechanic. He can do everything. He does everything DIY. Yeah. I mean, I can't do anything. I'm of that generation. The computer, I grew up in the 80s, and it was just football and computer games for me. But I found it quite tough, and obviously, I can see where he's coming from, but also you need to live your dreams as well. And I did that, which I was very, very proud of, kind of thing. But just going back to what you were saying about, obviously you're working with your dad and you're kind of going away calling fights and stuff. Tell me a little bit about how you got into your first kind of MMA promotion. How did that come about? Obviously, like you said, it was relatively unknown up until last 15, 20 years or so, isn't it?
Yeah, so, well, certainly in the UK, it took a little while before it really started to get going. But as I said, martial arts has been a theme. I started in judo when I was 7, and if I wasn't going to like a football camp at Easter or the summer holidays, I'd be going to judo camp. So that was quite a big thing for me. But then The Karate Kid and various other movies led me into karate. And that was something my uncle was participating in as well. I was and still am very close to my mum's brother, my uncle. So we did that together with another friend of mine. And that was through school, teenage years, young teenage years. And then none of my other friends, like my closer friends, really did anything like that. So that was always pretty tough. I think it's tough for any kid to indulge in stuff that others aren't doing, because no one wants to be a loner. Unless you're comfortable being a loner, then you might not embark on these challenges. And I obviously wanted to follow the crowd a lot of the time. So football became, a part of stuff, as it does for a lot of people, I guess, in the UK. But then another thing that's always been around us is boxing. My granddad used to fight for beer money outside the pubs. My dad's pretty useful. And my mum and dad's neighbour used to represent England in boxing. And I grew up in the Eubank Ben, Barry McGuigan, Prince Nassim Hamed times. Loved it. Loved boxing. So I ended up training with my neighbour, and then I ended up training and fighting for St Albans Amateur Boxing Club. So I did a few novice ABA bouts and some of the hearts, beds and bucks things. So it was really good, but it was when I was at uni and it just didn't really work. Boxing had, and maybe still has, quite an old school traditional mentality. And my coach used to say, "Oh, just do your uni work in the summer in the off season, and then we can box through the rest of the year." And the goal was the Olympics. And I'm not for 1 second saying that I was anywhere near that level, but that was what I wasn't looking to make a career out of it. But it would have been pretty cool to have represented the country at the Olympics, right? The nation at the Olympics. So anyway, I did that for a bit, but then again, I was going to boxing clubs by myself, walking through the door and not knowing anyone. It can get a bit gnarly. And I was there, did that for a few years, and again found myself back in football. MMA then grabbed me when I was in my late 20s, so there was a hiatus there. And I will answer your question. My coach at my second club put on his own promotion, and whereas before I'd been like holding pads in the back, doing a bit of cornering, just being part of the team and also part of the promotion and the infrastructure, just setting it up, putting flyers down, whatever, helping put the chairs out. We got to a point where we had people come down to the show to cover it. One digital network sent a reporter down to do like a backstage job. She did a terrible job, bless her. I don't think she knew what she was being thrown into, but she kind of made a bit of a mockery of it without probably intending to. And although we shouldn't have been offended, at the time I was so passionate about my coaches and other people that were achieving great things in mixed martial arts, but never getting any recognition, never being put side by side with even boxers, let alone like salary and earnings, just the prestige. And I just thought, this is bonkers, this is harder. This is the hardest training I've ever done. And I've done so many sports over the years. And I just felt compelled to try and help the sport. And my coach said to me one time, fancy doing some commentary, after I'd said I'd do the reporting. And I was like, you know what? Yeah, okay, I'll give that a go. And I remember back when I was at Watchdog, the BBC had like a little apprenticeship commentator thing going on. And I rubbished it back. I remember looking in I think there was a curricula that went around. And I remember reading it going, nah, I don't fancy that. I just wanted to be a presenter. But now the commentary thing made sense. So I ended up commentating by myself, single microphone on that local show. And it really, really taught me the ropes. It expanded the way I would research fights and fighters. And it put me in the community at grassroots level, which I think is so important. And I think that's why I'm different to some of the other MMA commentators out there that have gotten quite high up the food chain. And I was running around the back while guys are getting their hands wrapped. Tell me something about you, because there was no YouTube for an amateur fighter back then. And we're going back 10 years as well. A little bit of Facebook stalking, but if you're just dabbling in something, it's unlikely that you've got any accolades to speak of. So you really had to mine for the story. And yeah, it taught me a great deal, and it was a great time. And that lasted for a long time. And I never really thought anything was going to come of it apart from, one, helping my coach, and two, possibly getting to a point where I could help the sport. And that genuinely was all it was about back then.
It's mad to hear that you said that you done judo and karate and boxing, because I think from especially the job you do, I think it's imperative that you have some form of kind of experience in that. And you've been a fighter, albeit at not the highest level, but you've still done that, and it's that must have really helped you when you're even to this day commentating, because there's certain moves, there's certain things that fighters do, and you'd be able to kind of pick that out. Is that fair to say?
Yes and no. So I can't sit here and say that I think to be a commentator in my position, the lead commentator, the play-by-play guy, as it's called across the pond, I don't think it is imperative that you have practiced or competed. However, I do think it gives you an advantage. And I do think that my style of commentary is now different to, there are two other guys at the UFC, Brendan Fitzgerald and John Anik. Mine's different to them just because I speak the language. And even with boxing, you can pick stuff up by reading, was it Norman Miller who wrote the Ali book? There are so many books out there on technique and there's biographical material. There's so much stuff that you can naturally absorb, and a vocabulary that would make you sound like you know what you're talking about. But the nuances and the detail is different when you're in the ring, on the mats, in the cage. And when you're with a fight team, it just gives you a different perspective. Like I go through the motions with friends. Like I know what it's like to prepare for battle. I've been in their corners with them, in the locker rooms, when they've won, when they've lost. So because I have those experiences and I've lived through them many, many times, and it's sort of part of my genetics, I can draw on that. And what it allows me to do is it allows me to challenge whoever I'm in the seat next to. Because my role as a lead guy, it's not about me. It's definitely about the fighters or the athletes, if we're not sport specific. But then it's also about making whoever is sitting next to me sound really, really good. And if I can take the heavy lifting off of them from the real basic stuff, then that allows their neurological muscles to be flexed so that they can dig deeper and really tell us what it feels like to be in that situation, what they're about to do, why they should have done that or didn't do that, strategics stuff. And that's what I've sort of pride myself on. And that's why I still do it. I still get beaten up by young guys regularly. All right, not now that we're in lockdown, but I'm still taking licks, man. And it's I'm over 40 and I feel the pain, but I still love it. It's in me. Fighting is in me.
And I'm just going back, you were talking about when you're boxing, sparring and what have you. I just wanted to did you spar anyone that's became quite well known
in boxing?
Yeah, when you were boxing them.
Oh God, no, not really. I think a few of the guys were carrying on, and probably ended up being pretty good in the gym. Down a few guys went from St Albans, went over to Finchley, and that would have been about the same time that AJ was down there. A guy called Pete was very good. You know Mickey Elliott?
Yeah.
So he was probably the most, at the time, he was the most high-profile amateur that we had at St Albans, and it was I was competing or training at St Albans at the time when he failed his medical to turn pro. So that's why he transitioned into doing the promotional stuff and everything else. But I sparred with him a few times and couldn't put a glove on him. He's big. I'm going to say he's a lot bigger than me. But even so, like I couldn't get inside. We used to have a few guys come down to the gym because we weren't bad at St Albans. We had Sean Murphy, who had won a Lonsdale belt, and a few others back through the days. So we had a few people that would tour around when they were getting ready for the ABAs, etc. So maybe I just don't recall who they were. I've probably been beaten up by a few people that have done some good things. But yeah, I'm afraid I can't say that. Yeah, I landed a glove on anyone particularly special.
Well, Mickey's a nice guy. We do a lot of his events, film his events, and go to his events and stuff. He's a real nice guy. He's been promoting for years. So
yeah, and we've actually, funnily enough, my wife's cousin is like best friends with him. We went to their wedding, and Mickey was there, and he actually recognised me, which blew my mind. So yeah, it's interesting that we still sort of connected even to the day when we were training sort of 20 years back.
It's mad, isn't it? Did you we'll come into a bit more about some of the UFC stuff you've done, but did you not want to kind of go into like boxing commentary as well as like mixed martial arts?
I still haven't ruled it out. If I'm honest, I've never been approached about it. There's actually, see this little flyer here.
Yeah,
that was Models Fight Nights, and that was actually a bunch of models who had gone through like an 8-week training camp to do like an amateur boxing bout. That is as close as I've gotten. Is that as close as I've gotten? I think that's as much boxing I've done. I think there have been a few boxing matches in a cage, which I've never really agreed with because I think the ringmanship is very different. And then it's not boxing, it's not MMA. Don't get me started on that. But I still, and it's funny because of lockdown again, I've been assessing stuff, and some opportunities haven't presented themselves, and I've been a little upset that they haven't over the years. And boxing was one of them. But at the same time, I am happy with MMA and I do love it. I hope I get to do it for the rest of my days. I really do. But there is a part of me that would like to see how I'd be able to transition to boxing, because I do think I could do a job. But yeah, but I also know that boxing fans and MMA fans sometimes clash, and it's a bit of a shame. And I'm not sure how I'd be welcomed. But yeah, I certainly haven't closed the door. It just hasn't been offered to me.
Yeah, it's funny that you got your kind of two divide, haven't you? It's like rugby league, rugby union, isn't it? And I'm a massive fan of both. And I still to this day don't kind of, I know we're going off topic a little bit, but I don't kind of get that where there is a massive divide even till this day. It's I
think they can coexist quite happily. I think that the UFC, people sometimes even consider the UFC to be the sport, but of course it's not.
Yeah.
They have a model. They have a model that's different to boxing, and then boxing as a business, as a sport with the various different associations is very different to the way that to how these is different. But yeah, I wouldn't rule it out. Does Steve Holdsworth still commentate boxing? He actually commentated on a couple of my fights back in the day, and I know his sons. And I remember speaking to his sons, saying, this is when I was starting out in MMA, saying, I think I might try and give boxing a little go. Can I speak to your dad about it? Steve used to do a lot of the grassroots stuff back in the day. I mean, he's got rooms full of cassettes of all the fights that he would have commentated on. So very, very experienced. And his sons turned around to me and said, mate, stick with MMA. Boxing's kind of dying out, which I don't agree with. I think it's certainly resurged quite well recently. But yes, they steered me away again, away from boxing. But yeah, I have respect for a lot of the old boxing commentators, and I actually want to go back and listen to some more of like Harry Carpenter's calls and that, just to see if I can plagiarize a few of his wonderful lines from back in the day.
Yeah, Ian Darke's one of my
I like
favorite.
Yeah, and he does football as well.
Yeah,
yeah, brilliant broadcaster.
And the Radio 5 Live, Mike Costello, brilliant. Absolutely.
So I did a radio broadcast for 5 Live on a UFC event.
Yeah,
and one of the producers who works with Mike actually sent me a few clips of how he does it, because MMA had never been done on the radio before over here. So it was the first time it was being done, certainly for like a big network. And yeah, we could essentially write the rule book, but of course there are some broadcast basics. And I listened to Mike's work. A lot of respect for him after doing that. And I enjoyed what he did. I enjoyed the way that he set up the booth, or the way that he controls and manages that space with his team. Yeah, really good. Very good broadcaster.
Was that well received, the UFC on the radio?
Yeah, I think it's been a bit difficult because it's not a regular thing. Like, who knows about it? One thing I've learned in this new era of social media is you've kind of got to be there same time, same place every week for people to really catch on. And we've done it intermittently. I think I've only done it maybe 3 times out of 6 attempts that they've had a go at doing it. So there hasn't been the consistency to really break through. I enjoy it. I really do. I like being challenged as a broadcaster, and radio is very, very different to TV because, of course, you don't have the pictures to tell the story. Yeah. And with MMA, it's not just, and again, I'm not belittling boxing in any way, shape or form, but you have very different target areas in MMA. And to try and describe when someone's on a fence and what they're actually trying to do, whether they succeeded or failed, then they land on the floor. Where are they on the floor? What position are they in? What does that mean? I felt like I was doing horse racing at some points, just trying to give lots of examples of like parallels. That looks like a table because he's in this, but it was a bit bonkers. But it was fun. It was fun.
Yeah, radios. I like listening to the football on the radio, especially if I'm driving somewhere, because it's the way they describe it. It's literally painting the picture in front of you.
Yes.
And obviously television, you're there. So you're watching it. So it's very different, I think. But yeah, no, I agree. So I went off topic slightly there. I was just going back to your actual career itself. I mean, what was the first like major event that you got asked to commentate or present at, and how did that kind of come about?
When we say major, I think to be realistic here. So on a TV network, and it's got to be my first Cage Warriors gig or the first few Cage Warriors gigs. So Cage Warriors, for those that might not know, is probably the biggest European brand outside of a show called KSW, but English speaking wise, they've done a lot of good work for a long time. And there was like the first incarnation of Cage Warriors, which was under one management or guidance, and then the second, which has been under a gentleman called Graham Boylan, who got asked to lead Cage Warriors with a lot of backing from like financial backing from the Middle East. And that was when I was around, and it took me all over the Middle East and some places in Europe. It was like a traveling circus. It was, very fond memories. But the reason I got that gig, and I sort of dropped a seed in earlier by saying how the way I went about researching for my job was perhaps different to other people's, because Cage Warriors was a blend at the time, the first couple anyway, the KO MMA show, which was my coach's one, was a blend of amateur with a couple of professional bouts. I would go down to gyms where I would see there are a number of fighters on any one card. That's typically how MMA works. Even at the UFC, you normally have a couple of fighters from the same team. It sort of makes economic sense. So I'd go down to that gym and I'd stand there like a journalist pitch side, if you like, taking notes, seeing what they did, maybe trying to grab a couple of words with them and the coaches. What's the environment like? And that also developed into me calling up a coach and saying, look, can I jump in on a session? Because it wasn't a world champion like John Jones or Daniel Cormier. It was someone who was at the same level as me. So I would actually be another body for them. And then you join the brotherhood. And that's where I think I earned my stripes, by visiting gyms and not technically, not showing that I was of any decent level or not, whatever, just participating and showing that I was willing and I wanted to. Like, it wasn't a chore.
And building trust as well, building trust with like the teams and the fighters and so you're a good guy. You're not here to kind of spy or do this or do that.
Well, yeah, and it does take trust, because some of those guys might have been fighting my teammates and sometimes did, but you have to maintain an integrity. And I always did maintain that integrity. Like, even if you're a teammate and you come to me and say, So what did you see? I'm like, no, I can't do that. You know, it's just not fair. Not that I'd say it would make a great deal of difference. But anyway, I'd be on the mats with fighters. We'd sit down in between rounds or after the session and I'd learn their story. And I don't know what it is about when you're on the mats or even on the pitch, I guess, when you've gone through stuff together and the chemicals are all flying around because you're feeling good, you just remember stuff a bit better. You have more connective tissue that can really help you in the broadcast booth. And that's where I got picked up. That's when Graham Boylan saw that I was maybe doing things slightly differently. And he asked me if I was freelance, if I'd be willing to do stuff with him. So I did. I became his guy. And he kept me on board for a number of years with Cage Warriors. And when the UFC was starting to expand out internationally, I guess, you know, I was probably the most active guy on the scene at the time. And then I went through the screen testing process and, you know, the rest is history.
Yeah, it's mad, just little kind of breaks you get, but just Cage Warriors itself is fantastic. I mean, some of the fighters they've produced, it's kind of like a feeder, isn't it, for UFC, isn't it?
Yeah, I think they have now recognised it in that way. I don't know if at all times that was necessarily what they would have wanted. I don't know if I was leading that promotion, whether I would want to be the feeder, because you put all of this time and effort into building a fighter and only for them to just go, go, and then you've lost your main ticket seller. But because the UFC and Cage Warriors now have this relationship in that the UFC have their own platform called UFC Fight Pass, it's their own broadcast network. Cage Warriors events are on that network. The UFC pays them for that. And so there is now there's now a pathway and there's a relationship. So I'm sure there's lots of dialogue, and also it can prove the other way. So when someone gets cut from the UFC, Cage Warriors is somewhere where they can take a fighter if they're not looking to retire, and they've earned a bigger name, and they will automatically sell tickets. So I think it's been good business for both the UFC and Cage Warriors to be in bed together in that way.
Yeah, we recently obviously saw that with Darren Stewart with the UFC London fight cancelled. He went and fought on the Cage Warriors event.
Yeah, it didn't work out so good for him, unfortunately. But, you know, Darren had to take risks. That's the thing about the fight game. He also has another job, and he's climbing the totem pole, so to speak. And
great guy, really nice guy. He's
a proper nice guy. Now, interestingly, I commentated on, I think, his first amateur fights at Cage Warriors. So I saw him very early on. I've seen him grow, and I've been down I trained at his gym. He wasn't there, but a long time back. So yeah, I'm showing my age now and how long I've been around the game.
What was your most memorable event called for Cage Warriors, and what was the worst experience, I should say?
Yeah, that's quite interesting because there were some bonkers ones. I think in a good and bad way, we did Cage Warriors Chechnya. Now, Chechnya is a controversial place.
I vaguely remember this. This is when it was on BT Sport.
Was it on BT at the time?
I think it was BT. Okay. Oh, I remember it because it had a lot of negative press. I don't remember the show. I just remember it had a lot of negative press because it was going out there.
It would be, because the leader, Ramzan Kadyrov, is a controversial character. Yeah. So, you know, and why are you going there? When I looked on the government guidelines, it was like, do not go to Chechnya or Dagestan. And we had to fly to Chechnya, fly to Dagestan, drive all the way through Dagestan to get to Chechnya. So we were crossing off the two most dangerous parts of Europe. So that was kind of like, that was pretty gnarly. Nothing happened to us, but like armed checkpoints every half an hour, every hour, an arduous trip to get there, and like guns and really moody people all in military attire. And you just didn't know what you were going to expect. And we didn't really know whether we were safe. So yeah, looking back now, you could laugh, but there were times where I was like, why am I doing this? But it was for the love of the sport. I didn't want to lose my seat. And I'm glad I did have the experience. And a lot of people who stuck around for like another half a day or so, had some very positive things to say about their interactions with the Chechen people, which is great to hear. So I would put that down as an experience, both positive and negative. I think another one that really springs to mind is the New Year. I think it was the New Year's Eve show where McGregor won. Is that where he won the second belt? I think it is where he became the 2-weight champion. I might put New Year's Eve show in brackets, but we certainly did a show in Dublin. McGregor headlined. He beat Ivan Bushinger. It was an incredible knockout. A lot of his fellow Irish country folk were on the card as well. Always great matchmaking by Ian Dean at Cage Warriors. Really one of the greatest minds in the sport. He's like the oracle. He really is. And he puts together some very good fights. So there are so many treats there. But that felt like we were part of something special. McGregor, you knew at that point he was going on to something big. We could feel it by the crowd. The crowd were jumping. I think the time before at the Helix, which is where we were broadcasting, they tried to get in the cage, which was bonkers. So this time Conor came out of the cage. He actually kneed me in the face because he jumped on the commentary position to get to his fans. And in his transition, I remember he didn't mean to, of course, just getting across. It was like craziness. But he did jump on the commentary mixer. And as he went across onto this little raised stage, so if I'm here, the stage where all of his fans were kind of above me, and he knocked my headset off. I've caught it. I've now not got the headpiece on. I'm sort of holding like a microphone like this to sort of carry the broadcast on. And then my claim to fame after was I took a knee off of Conor McGregor and stayed with it, got through a broadcast, and others haven't in the past. So yeah, that was a real moment, and it's obviously been very beneficial for my career to have been around Conor McGregor and everything that he's done. I would like to think that there's respect comes back because we've been on a journey at a similar sort of time, and I commentated a lot of his fights. I've always secretly wanted that sort of. I mentioned Harry and Frank Bruno. I've always thought that was so cool, to have been so close to a certain fighter that he would give you the story and you understood one another and that sort of thing. And I would love to have had that with a fighter. Maybe it still happened. I'm very fond of Darren Till, and he's very generous with his time as well. So yeah, we're in a privileged position as commentators, and we get to get really close and personal up with the action and sometimes with the fighters themselves. Yeah,
it's nice when you build that sort of rapport with like certain fighters. I mean, we like to think because we're like the grassroots. We're seeing the guys come up, and when these guys hopefully get big, they give us. Yeah, because there's not many of us that give them the time or film their fights and things. And,
yes.
Go to the gyms and do things. So it's nice because we like them. We like doing that. We've got the trust of people. It's a nice thing to have, and hopefully we'll see a lot of these guys, and I'm sure they will. Go on to big things once this is very similar like what you've seen with, say, Conor and what have you.
Yeah, and I think one thing I've learned from mixed martial arts is certain fans get really funny about new fans and casuals, and it's a bit like that the hardcore music scene that as soon as a band or an act went mainstream, it's like, no, I don't like him anymore. It's kind of weird. So I think that any people, I'm guessing if someone's watching this, it might be because they're interested in our side of the microphone, if you like. When you do put in the hard yards at the beginning, you get the respect from the athletes and from their peers, because they will remember that you invested in them early on. And that's really important, because there will be a lot of people that will jump in when they make it. But if you're in a crowded room and those guys are a bit salty about that sort of thing, then they might look to you because they've trusted you and you've been there and you've earned your stripes. So I think it's important that people do come in at the grassroots level. Don't neglect the other end either, but I think you can be part of something really special as a result. Absolutely.
And some of the best fights I've seen are on a non-TV show, like a York Hall, for example.
Yeah.
And it's brilliant. And some of these some of these fighters that come out are really nice guys, and it's just nice to see a different side. Whereas, you know, you see, obviously on TV, you know, you got your AJs and what have you, but what we do is, and much like yourself, you see these guys kind of grow, and it's great. It's it's a really nice side. Just, I suppose, going from Cage Warriors, and obviously you got your big break with the UFC. How did that come about? And the feeling that you must have got to kind of commentate for the UFC must have been unreal.
Yeah, it was a really bizarre time, because I'd actually been let go of by Cage Warriors. I've started to tell people this more recently. It's like, it is what it is. Throughout this, although Cage Warriors were a big promotion in relative terms, like a lot of people, it's just the money's just not in the sport. So you're not earning from it. I'm getting paid something, but in terms of my job, like, I'm having to take holiday time, etc. And I just didn't, I wasn't breaking even. But it, again, didn't matter. It's not about that. But I did get to a point where my wife was saying, this is a bit of a pipe dream that you've got here with this broadcasting malarkey, and I'm going away every weekend. I'm missing weddings and christenings, birthdays, anniversaries. I'm always away, just indulging in a selfish pursuit. So at some point, you got to come back with something. And I'd gotten to October and I'd run out of holiday time already. I think this is 2013. So I called up Cage Warriors and said, look, if you can pay me the same money as I'd get on sites, then at least I'm covering myself. But I can't just, you need to help me out. And they turned around and said no, and they might call me next year. And at that point, I was heartbroken. You know, I'd been on this ride with them for a few years and thought that I was sort of part of the furniture, if you like, the new era of Cage Warriors. And I was like, I thought it was all done. I really did. I thought that's it. So I then called up some people at the UFC that I knew and just tried to just work in mixed martial arts. It wasn't to be a commentator. Didn't think that there was any chance. I just wanted to work in MMA in a full-time capacity rather than what I was doing. I just wanted to explore that, and actually had a couple of interviews, some conversations with some senior people there. And I thought I was going to join the team, like the business team, for the UFC EA Sports game. And I was told that the offer was coming, and to the day I'm waiting on that offer letter. But it didn't come. Fortunately, I didn't hand in my notice with my day job. And eventually, when the UFC decided that they were going to start putting on more events, again, I didn't know that this was happening. I got called up. I got asked to go and screen test for it. It wasn't long since I'd been knocked back almost by BT Sport. They had gotten the rights to the UFC and they were doing a magazine show. I'd asked and was talking to some producers there. I said, please let me come in and speak to you guys. I want to be part. Yeah, I kept getting knocked back. And and then this commentary gig came around, and that was the golden egg. Like, if I'd have gotten this gig with BT Sport as a presenter, then I probably wouldn't have been able to take the role with the UFC as the commentator. So yeah, I screen tested. I was up against some other people. I think a very well-known breakfast radio DJ was in the running as well. And the UFC, who fortunately probably didn't know who he was from Adam. They chose the guy that knew the sport best, I guess, and had studied their format and could work within the confines of that. And I'd like to think I had a small reputation of doing some work and a bit of legacy, if you like. And I guess that landed me the deal.
Do you think if you hadn't got that deal, you'd still be, like, say, doing the smaller circuit kind of shows, or do you think that you would have?
Yeah, no, I think I would actually, because I was also doing stuff like Safe MMA, which was a medical initiative for blood testing, and physical examination, which wasn't mandatory in the sport for promotions. I think it was very, very important that the MMA had that introduced before the House of Cards fell in, because not a lot with boxing as well. The British Medical Association don't want it around. They simply want to close it down. So we need to build a good foundation. So I was working in a few different capacities, and of course, still being part of a gym, a team. I was always going to be in and around the sport, and I maintain, even if the UFC thing goes away, I will find myself in some capacity helping mixed martial arts. So yes, I truly believe that I'd still be there.
What's again? I asked you for this for the cage warriors, but what's been the best and worst events that you've commentated at?
I think very obviously the show in Dublin, which Conor McGregor headlined against Brandao, was a standout one. It was the real peak of Irish mixed martial arts, and I'd seen Irish mixed martial arts growing at Cage Warriors. Graham Boylan is an Irishman himself, and John Kavanagh and him were working quite closely, and SBG Ireland had a lot of talent. So we saw a lot of those athletes come through Cage Warriors, and then a lot of things just progressed onto the UFC stage. So that was a great night to see how well everyone did, and the celebration of the sport, and just how good Irish fans are. My God, they were outstanding. Without them, that event wouldn't have been anywhere near my top three, I don't think.
I actually watched that event. The McGregor fight randomly last week. It was on.
Oh, really?
Yeah, I think it was on BT. It just randomly popped up on my YouTube, so I watched it.
Right. Yeah, it was amazing. So that was a big one. Worst ones, I mean, and people wouldn't have known, but they were just like bad shows for me. I got ill during a broadcast in Singapore. I'd just done a show with Brian Stan in New Zealand. I was doing back-to-back shows, I think, for the first time for the UFC. So that was a big thing for me. And I'd prepared my socks off. And for some reason, every time I spoke in the broadcast, I felt like I was going to pass out. And that happened at like the second fight. And even between the main card and the prelims, I had to get taken backstage, and they took all my vitals, temperature, blood pressure, and everything was fine. But I felt awful, like really, really unwell, and honestly, like I was going to black out. And I had to really rein in my commentary and find those moments where I could push myself, because I felt if I pushed too hard, I'd just go, and that wouldn't have been good. So that was a very, very difficult broadcast for me. And yeah, just the feeling, I just felt horrid. So that was probably the worst, but that was just, as I say, that was a personal thing on just not feeling great. I don't want to repeat that again. But yeah, I've got so many beautiful memories with the UFC, and I'm thinking back now to the show we did in February down in Auckland, New Zealand. And now with the pandemic that has presented itself, that's come about, I haven't worked since, and I was with a couple of officials, David Letherby, Mark Goddard, guys that I've been on the scene with for a long time, that I'd call friends as well as colleagues. And weirdly, we even said to one another, if this is the last gig we've ever done, isn't this wonderful? Because we took a day out to go to an island called Waiheke, which is like loads of vineyards, etc. Absolutely stunning. And honestly, like, if it is the last time I ever work for the UFC, God forbid, but like what a experience on the back of the show and everything around it. Because Paul Felder was in the main event. He's a good friend of mine.
Yeah, of course. It was a great fight. That was.
It was a great fight. Yeah, so that was I'll look back on that with memories, and right now it sticks in my mind because I'm so desperate to get back to work. But I had a great experience last time out.
How long does it take you? So, you know, when you've got the gig, you've obviously got some time to prepare, but how long do you spend preparing and researching fighters for that card? Because, you know, you can have a card of about 10 to 14 fights. And some of them are going to be relatively unknown, and some of them obviously are going to be quite well known. How long does it take you, you know, to really prepare for that?
Yeah, well, I think there's a few things to consider. One, I don't ever stop. So I'm always watching the fights every week. I'm across social media like everyone else, you know, rightly or wrongly. So I do make notes. Like, I'll see someone will post something, like they're training with someone that they haven't trained with before, or they've gone to maybe Thailand for this camp. So I'll be screenshotting that, and I'll make sure that goes in my Evernote system, which is a little plug. I don't get paid for that, but it's a wonderful little cloud-based thing. So I collate a lot of information just on a daily basis of things I'm seeing, hearing, phrases, words, whatever it might be. And then when I get an assignment, which could be a month out, I'll start casually putting pieces together. printing out a fight card so it's in my periphery so I can start thinking about the names that are on there. But definitely I'm going through the gears quite frantically in 2 weeks up to an event, because we have not only the fighters to prepare for, but a UFC broadcast is probably one of the most complicated broadcasts in sports. It is a marathon broadcast. It's 7 hours long. There are few breaks because we have a world feed and a feed for like ESPN. So we even keep going for the world feed, which is constantly on. So there's a lot of stuff that you got to do for that. I take maybe up to 200 pieces of paper into a broadcast each time. And each one of those pieces of paper has scripts, promotional material, and stuff like that. So there's a lot of work that goes into that. But then also the fighters, their biographical material, the stats, the watching of tape, and things of that nature. So I take pride in my research. I really like to bring new stuff to each broadcast. And I just enjoy that process. It's geeky, but if I didn't love that, then I'm in the wrong game.
Or do you ever find it hard not to be biased towards a fighter that you know quite well, or you quite like? For instance, let's say Conor McGregor that you've kind of grown up to. It must be really hard to kind of keep a neutral stance.
Yeah, I think one would assume that. And I would, as like everyone else, the human condition. So it's at the forefront of your mind. But actually, when you, again, going back to covering grassroots stuff, you'll probably, like I did, I ended up commentating on my coach's show. My coach was putting on that show to give his fighters an opportunity. Those fighters are my friends and sparring partners and teammates. So now I'm half the card are guys that I train with. The other half is the enemy. But I wouldn't be doing a job if I was celebrating just one side. You always have to celebrate the art form. You have to celebrate with the winner, and you have to show compassion and empathy to the runner-up, as I sometimes call them. So now I think I am pretty well trained. Again, like my coach, I've commentated on one of my coach's fights before. It doesn't get more tricky than that. I'm talking about his technique, and he's the guy that teaches me technique. Like if Dan Hardy gets back in the octagon one day, I've been working with Dan for a long time now. I'd love to be on that broadcast, but I'd have to tread very carefully because I learn a lot from him. But at the same time, it is my job, and there is a journalistic aspect to my job and you have to uphold those values. So you just got to be neutral. And what that sometimes means is going in harder on the person that you know or is closer, or you're closer to than the other.
You answered the question I was going to ask you next about that. If Dan got back in the ring, the cage, how would that be? But just continuing on your relationship with Dan, it's like a real bromance. Obviously, you guys do the, you not only commentate together, but you do the bits and pieces, like breaking down the fights, which is really incredible. How did that kind of feel about moving just from commentating to doing that, and how was it like the first time you kind of met with Dan? And because obviously a relationship takes time to build. I know it's a two-part question, but
well, first of all, I've been watching Dan. I respected his work, and I knew his manager. So his manager was a really good sort of buffer zone conduit for me. So I got to speak to Dan before my screen test that I did with him. So I explained who I was. I didn't assume that he knew my work. And I kind of said, look, this is how I would like to carry the broadcast. If you'll just humor me, let me do it that way. And I think we'll get it done. And I shared some information with him. Like a commentary booth is a partnership. Like it's not one against the other. It will never work. You can't compete for the microphone. It will get clumsy. So you do have to be streamlined in your efforts. And I think Dan is he's a good man, and he understands a lot of the human elements. Yeah, there's just certain things about Dan. Lack of arrogance, self-awareness is very good with Dan. So he understands what it takes to bring a sport, an alternative sport like mixed martial arts, to the masses. And I would like to think that I've got a good handle on how to do that as well. And we were very aligned in how that went through. So, of course, you understand one another as more and more conversations come about. But at first, I have to say, it really was Dan allowing me that space and not being arrogant and not being kind of a Mr. Know-it-all. And I really respect and admire him for that, because I should take some credit in the fact that I'd been doing that job week in, week out for a long time. And actually, he wasn't used to doing commentary. So he respected me for my work and I respected him for his opinions. And that was key. And that's why it worked so well. But if he hadn't have done that and allowed me that space, then it wouldn't have worked. So it takes two to make that relationship work. And we're just lucky, I guess, that I genuinely enjoy his company. He's a very interesting guy. I go to him for advice on stuff. You know, he's a good man and a great martial artist. So I'm very lucky to have his ear.
Yeah, because you guys have obviously formed this partnership, which is, you know, it's quite well known. Obviously, you've got the American cards with John and Brandon Fitzgerald and what have you, and then like a lot of the European cards you guys do, and Asia and stuff. And obviously, American audiences are now getting to used to you guys. Do you think at some stage you'll get that pay-per-view?
I'd like to think so. I mean, I am truly happy with my lot. I enjoy my job, and certainly now it's like I'll take anything. You know, I'll take anything with the UFC. But you have to have ambition. You have to keep striving. And there's no reason why I couldn't handle a pay-per-view broadcast. I've been doing this job a long time. I've been doing this job as long as John Anik had done before he got the pay-per-view events. And as the sport grows and as we have pay-per-views in different territories, I'd like to think that there would be an opening for me where perhaps John Anik can't get to it or something like that. I'd just like to say that I have a very good relationship with Anik. John's helped me greatly throughout my UFC days and a little bit before that as well. So we're not, I don't see myself in competition with him. We are a team. There are enough shows to go around. And I actually think that John would be really happy to see me get to taste what it's like to do a pay-per-view show. So, yeah, I see it as a natural progression. So long as the UFC have me, I just see that maybe through ill health, God forbid, I might get that odd chance to do a pay-per-view call.
Maybe Fight Island.
Well, I mean, Fight Island is geared up for the internationals, right? So, I mean, that of course includes our North American friends as well. But that gives an opportunity, hopefully, to the likes of Dan and I to take a trip out to wherever this Fight Island is. But it's a brilliant piece of promotional material, and I don't even know if it was by design, you know. But Dana is, I mean, what a phenomenal leader in that sense. And now I just want to go. Like, get me to Fight Island. I want to see it all.
And I'm assuming you haven't had a heads up saying, look, we are doing these shows at this island. You know, we may need you.
I have.
Oh, you have?
They are, like, Fight Island is a thing. Like, I've been told Fight Island is genuine.
So you may be going.
So I may be going. I just don't know when. I don't think, and the UFC don't know when. But Fight Island is a thing. And I have been told that, like, hold on, because when we're good to go, hopefully you'll be good to go too.
I think it's brilliant what they're doing. It's I think we're just all all just waiting to find out where it is. But it's good that they're keeping it kind of like a secret. I think it's I think that's,
oh yeah, great, the suspense. Yeah. And they're not telling anyone. Even
Joe Rogan doesn't know, does he? So.
Yeah, and I think that's probably good. Just keep it under your hats, because
it's easier to slip out, isn't it?
Well, I can't understand how it hasn't, because the UFC infrastructure, peeling back the curtain again, they do not do things by halves. They're not gonna give the fans a halfway product.
Mm.
And in order to do things right, the UFC need to have modern technology in place. So you can't just go to a third world country and put on the UFC. So you need stuff. And I just can't understand how someone who is installing this stuff
Yeah,
hasn't put
I've
two
said
and
that
two
to my
together.
friend the other day. Like, surely a builder or someone would have taken. You know, you
Yeah.
see it sort of taking a picture or this
Yeah,
or that.
I know.
Obviously, they've had to sign something, but
Probably, unless they think they're working on something else. But I really don't know. But it's brilliant. And even if it does leak tomorrow, which I hope it doesn't, I'm enjoying the drama of
yeah,
how long it's remained a thing. There's bloody T-shirts now.
I saw that.
Fight Island T-shirt,
Yeah.
and everyone wants one. I'd love a Fight Island T-shirt.
Yeah, I saw that. I think it was on Twitter this morning. Someone was wearing it. I can't remember who it was wearing it. Anyway, it looks.
Well, Laura Sanko, Kelvin Gastelum, there's a couple of those guys. But
Yeah, well, we'll have to see. Obviously, I think the fights. I mean, whoever the fight, even if they just had a prelim card out there, I think because it's been built up, so everyone will be tuning into that one. So massively looking forward.
yeah.
Another question that someone asked me was, have you ever had, when you've either been interviewing or talking to a fighter a lot, where they basically fobbed you off and had a lot of, they've just not given you the time of day, and obviously as a presenter or you're doing like an interview, it's you have to remain kind of focused. Have you ever had someone that's like that?
Yeah, I have. I've had it a few times. I think I won't say who it was. It just the UFC is such a small company, small world. But I have had it a few times. 2 out of 3 times that come to mind have ended up positive for me. So one of them was very disappointing. I do a lot of work during fight week. The little sizzles you see where the sound bites come out, where they're talking about what they're going to do or whatever. Like, I'm the guy, whenever I work a show, typically I'll be the producer as well for that part. So I'll be asking the questions to try and enact those responses. And listen, it's not like this interview. You're just trying to get people to speak sound bites. And so it's a very cold interview. It's not how I like interviewing.
Yeah.
Anyway, it's a job and it's a skill in itself. And I had one guy who I don't think he was big on the UFC at the time. So anyone that was wearing a UFC employee tag, he just wasn't being particularly nice to. And I was one of them. And I tried really, really hard. And there were some associations outside of the UFC where we knew mutual people and we had shared interests, whatever. And I remember he sat down while I was trying to like warm up, and he just did this. And I thought, can I swear?
Yeah, of course you can say what you want.
I thought, motherfucker.
Yeah.
Like, really? I'm trying really hard over here. And I just thought that I deserved a bit more than that. Not because of like my standing, but just as a human being. Like, I would never do that to someone. I'd never said anything about this guy. I'd never commentated on his fights before, any of that. So that was upsetting. But then another couple of instances, I had one guy come in, same setup. Like he said, I don't want to be here. Let's just get this done so I can move on. And I was like, well, that's a bad start, isn't it? You know, that's a really bad start. But then by the end of the conversation, he didn't want to leave the room because we managed to connect over martial arts. And I knew this person from afar, really respected his art form, and the questions that I'd asked, and then I had to be as charming as I could rather than be confrontational, which you should never be in an interview. It doesn't help anyone. Even when you're faced with that, you have to remain calm. And I ended up, as I say, just kind of trying to charm the pants off of him. And we walked out of that. And from that moment on, he would make an effort to come and see me and the whole crew. And to the day, we have a good relationship where he's not local. And we would have like DMs and things like that. And it's just, maybe he had a bad day. Like there was a lot going on for him. I respect that goes on. So yeah, that was another time where it was a bit unfortunate, but it came to the good. and another one, which I will tell you who it was because it wasn't, it was a bit two-way. I got to interview someone called Krokop, Mirko Krokop, who is a bit of a legend. And there was a breakdown in communication. I was visiting him in Zagreb, and we'd turned up in the evening for the afternoon session, which is actually at his home. And we had a load of kit. Like a UFC shoot is done properly. Big cameras, big lights, boom microphones, like loads of stuff. And as we're offloading at his property, he just comes out and goes, no, not today. We're not filming today. And I was like, oh shit. I'd heard he was really, like, he's intimidating at the best of times, but if he didn't like you, then good luck. And we were about to spend 2 days with him. I'm like, this is the worst possible start. So I'm thinking, oh shit. And we were getting the stuff back in the car, and he came back out, this time way less aggressive, and said, look, I'm really sorry. He said, but I genuinely didn't think you were coming tonight. Like, I was told you were coming tomorrow. So I wasn't prepared for you, and I'm in the middle of something. So I was like, no. You're absolutely right. If you didn't think we were coming, we shouldn't be here. Are you okay tomorrow? Are you okay at that time? Yes. Perfect. We'll be there. Have a nice evening. And we went back the next day, and he was great. And as much as he didn't want to do like certain things, when we got down to do the interview, I was mesmerized by him. The stories, the anecdotes, things that I'd never known about him, tracing back through the years. Like I was a bit of a fanboy, and that's okay. But it allowed me to be so interested in his story, and he loved the fact that I was interested. And we did a really long interview, and after that, but if he saw me at events, like, he would grab me, like, and you know, when he grabbed you, you'd know about it. He's a very strong man. I went halfway across the room a couple of times, and really, really nice guy. Shame I haven't seen him since, but that was one which was going really pear-shaped from the first moment, and turned around to be like a very memorable trip and a very memorable interview.
Do you, when you first started working for the UFC, did you ever find yourself being a bit of a fanboy when you say certain, you know, let's say for instance you saw, I don't know, John Jones or something, and you'd be like, oh my God, that's John, you know? Did you find yourself like trying to take yourself down a peg because it's like, oh no, I've got to be like professional here, but really you want to go up and get a picture?
Honestly, not really. I don't know if that makes me sound good or bad. I think that, just something in my character type where they're just human beings, you know, and I understood. And I think also the sport of mixed martial arts is a bit different, and the profile of people is a bit different. Now to sort of get close to Conor I would be interested to see what it's like to see Conor again after all this time, from, you know, when we were on the road together back in the Cage Warriors days. Yes, I've seen him since, but he is a superstar now, and I would approach things probably differently, rightly or wrongly. Dana White is someone who I do get a little bit like that with, if I'm honest. I think because he writes my checks as well, that probably adds to my nervousness as I go closer to him. But you know, one thing that did stand out, and it was just the scale of stuff. And this was from the early days more so than now. But when I did my first gig, which was the O2, the London's O2, 16,000 people. And it gave me an appreciation for all people that are in the public eye, because I'd never done anything of that. I was doing 1,000-seater halls or whatever it might have been, to then the O2, and I hadn't actually been to the O2 before. So I walked in on rehearsal day, and I just looked at this expanse, and I honestly, it felt like as I was looking around, I was corkscrewing myself into the floor, like I was this tiny little thing in this huge space. And I thought, I'm part of a broadcast here tomorrow. Like, this is crazy. There are going to be so many eyes on me at some point as well. Even though I'm not fighting, like at some point I'm opening the show. And I honestly wanted to have like the blinkers that the horses put on. I just didn't want to see anything. And it was a moment where I thought, oh, that's why celebrities wear sunglasses. Because it narrows your field of vision so that you don't take in all of these people with eyes on you. And it did make me understand to a tiny degree what they face. So I respected that for a moment. Yeah, just driving into the O2 and going into the belly of the beast, then going through the back halls where some of the biggest, you know, music stars had walked, and you're like, this is bonkers. And yeah, again, what these fighters must feel as well, in like a gladiatorial sense, just to add that other layer. It's my job to try and get those sorts of things across in a broadcast.